What if we lived during the Middle Ages? Have you always wanted to know what medieval life was like? Would you travel back in time if it were possible? We're here to do exactly that. Do you think you will like it? How long will you last? Listen here, medieval sucks. Let's see why. Beginning of the Middle Age. After 200 years of stability and prosperity under the Pax Romana, the Roman Empire was in crisis and decline. Thus began the Middle Ages, better known as the Dark Ages. It started towards the end of the 5th century and lasted until the origin of the Renaissance in the 14th century. It was a time when life was brutal and scary. Unless you were a knight, noble, or king yourself, hygiene was poor, money was scarce, the disease was rampant, and punishments were cruel. Actually, life was tough back then, but people got through it. They even managed to have fun while struggling to survive. Compare how they lived to you today, and see if you could ever trade places and live in that era. A typical day in a medieval town starts at 4 a.m. The church bells ring, announcing the first mass of the day. But unless you come from a noble or royal family, you wouldn't be going to church this morning. Instead, prepare your wares for sale at the market, which opens at 6 a.m. And so it was for the next 9 hours, hoping to make enough money to buy chicken for dinner instead of eating the old one. Around 3 p.m., most of the retail outlets start to close for the day, and at 8 p.m. the city gates close, and the night watchman takes up his post. Dinner at your house might not be anything special, but in the castle, the king is having a party. The fun doesn't end with dinner. When the plates were cleared, the city's elite took to the dance floor, even the knights. Lots of parties in the Middle Ages. Were you aware that a total of about 8 weeks per year is set aside for festivals or events? While many of these festivals are church-related, the city also hosts tournaments that are not sanctioned by the church. This was probably because the match became a spectacle of violence, from jousting to sword fighting to prisoner duels to the death. If you think it's mean, it won't get any better. Most serious crimes are resolved through the courts. For example, if you are accused of a felony, you could be sentenced to water probation. You are thrown into a body of water with your hands and feet tied. If you fall, you are innocent. For if you swim, it means that you must renounce baptism when you enter the devil's ministry and therefore prevented from entering the water. The plight of women in the Middle Age. Women in the Middle Ages were legally required to be subservient to a man, be it their father, husband, or other relatives. Widows, often given control over their own lives, are still limited by law. The 3 main activities of male and female farmers were farming, raising livestock, and making textiles. Wealthy city women could become merchants like their husbands, or even become moneylenders, while middle-class women worked in the textile, inn, shop, and brewing industries. Citizen women were responsible for the household like village women and could also be involved in trafficking. Poorer women often trade and sell food and other goods in the market, or work in wealthier households as domestic servants, laborers, or laundresses. For almost all young children growing up in medieval England, the first year of life was one of the most dangerous, with about 50% of children dying from a fatal disease in that year. In addition, 20% of women die during childbirth. Many objects of today's world were also found in that time. Many objects we still use today, such as mechanical clocks and printing presses, were also found during this period. Too bad they didn't find a toothbrush. In fact, when you were rich, it was fashionable to have rotten teeth because it showed that you could afford sugar. Weird, isn't it? To continue to learn more such interesting facts, please subscribe to our channel, Just History. The High Middle Ages was a time of enormous population growth. Estimates of the population of Europe grew from 35 to 80 million between 1000 and 1347. But the exact reasons remain unclear. Better agricultural techniques, a decrease in slavery, a warmer climate, and an absence of invasions have all been suggested. No longer settling in isolated farms, many of them were gathered into small communities, usually known as manors or villages. These peasants were often subject to noble lords and owed them rent and other services in a system known as manorialism. Villages were prepared to face their rivals. Castles were built in the 9th and 10th centuries as a response to the turmoil of the times and offered protection from invaders and rival rulers. They were initially made of wood and later of stone. As soon as the castle was built, a city was built around it. A significant factor in the city's development was the Viking raids of the early Middle Ages, which caused villages to be walled up and their positions strengthened. Large medieval walled cities were later built with houses, shops, and churches within the walls. York, England, which prospered during most of the late Middle Ages, is famous for its medieval walls and taverns, and still has the giant surviving medieval walls preserved in the city today. The practice of sending children as helpers is more common in cities than in rural areas. Most of the townspeople made their living as merchants or artisans, and these activities were tightly controlled by the guilds. These union members employ young people, primarily boys, as apprentices to learn the trade and then take up positions as union members. Heat has always been a problem in the Middle Ages. Even in the homes of the rich, comfort is not always found. Small windows don't let in much light, and oil and grease-based candles often give off a strong odor. The furniture consists of wooden benches, long tables, and cupboards. Even though the beds are made of the softest materials, they are often infested with bedbugs, fleas, and other biting insects. Ew. Nobles used to exploit houses. The nobles, both those with the titles of nobility and ordinary knights, exploited the houses of the nobility and peasants, even though they did not own land but were granted rights to the income from the manor or other land by the lord through the feudal system. In the 11th and 12th centuries, these lands or fiefs were considered hereditary and, in most areas, were no longer divisible among all heirs, as they had been in the early Middle Ages. Instead, most fiefdoms and estates fell into the hands of the eldest son. The rule of the nobility was based on land control, their military service as heavy cavalry, control of castles, and various immunity from taxes or other levies. Science didn't exist in the Middle Ages. Not very hygienic, but it's not the Middle Ages. You keep your hands and face clean for the sake of appearance, but apart from the rich, no one really owns a toilet or a bathroom as we do today. It's a time of survival and redemption, and whatever people did to deal with it usually worked, at least until the 14th century. The last century of the Middle Ages really brought darkness to the Dark Ages, as it was overshadowed by famine, conflict, and disease. The plague, also known as the Black Death, wiped out up to 60% of Europe's population in one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, and it took about 200 years for the world's population to return to its previous level. But over the next few centuries, Europe experienced a renaissance, a time when people pursued truth and accuracy through skepticism and careful consideration of empirical evidence. This period marked the start of a scientific revolution that continues to this day. In retrospect, the Middle Ages played an influential role in the development of modern society, but is this really something we need to visit to see for ourselves? So that was it. I hope your ride back in time was good. Remember to subscribe to our channel, Just History, and motivate us by dropping an amazing comment in the section down below. We will, of course, continue to create great videos for you, just like we've been doing to date. Check out our other videos too, and collect unique history facts.